is Susie Francois. Welcome to the documentary feature Q&As. We have a lot of impactful features, and I hope everyone gets a chance to watch these very important documentaries. So I would like for everyone to introduce themselves and also provide a brief log line about your documentaries. And whoever wants to jump in, feel free to do so. And don't be shy. How about Hazel?
Hello. Hi, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having us, for me, and for having the Storming Caesar's Palace streaming and playing at your festival. We're so excited to be here. So Storming Caesar's Palace is a historical documentary, feature length, and it is about Las Vegas activist Ruby Duncan, who was fighting for welfare rights and a guaranteed income with her grassroots organization 50 years ago. So very exciting.
Thank you. Catherine?
Thank you so much for showing our film on your festival. Our film is Dying for Gold, and it is also a historical documentary, and it covers basically the brutality of the South African economy, which is built on gold. So in line with the parallel stories between current day miners and ex-miners and their families, with the historical building of South Africa's economy on the back of gold miners and migrant workers from all across the region, Mozambique, Lesotho, Swaziland, rural areas of South Africa. And so that's what our film covers. Thank you.
Thank you. Tam?
Hi, everyone. My name is Tam No. I am a co-producer of Rising from the Fall. Our documentary is a reflection of the Vietnamese American experience. We wanted to capture the perspective of our respective elders that survived the Vietnam War, but also give voice to the children that they raised, which is us, the younger generation. So we wanted to design a space for dialogue so that we can learn who we are, why we're here, and what we've been through. And so the film is inspired by our families and our community. Some of us have some idea, some of us have no clue. Neither is right or wrong. And so Nok and I hope that this inspires you to ask about your family's history and also join us in keeping the spirit and pride of our culture ongoing. And I'll pass it over to Nok.
Thank you, Tam. Hi, my name is Nok Lee. I am the producer and director for Rising from the Fall. Tam said it all. Thank you.
Emily?
Yes, my name is Emily Hanako Momohara, and I too have a documentary about family and legacy. The film is called Namba, a Japanese American's incarceration and life of resilience. And it's really a coming of age film about a woman named May Namba, who is part of the Japanese American community in Seattle. It chronicles beginning in 1940 through World War II, the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the executive order that puts Japanese Americans into incarceration camps. And the film is narrated by her granddaughter as she kind of discovers what May had lived through. And it's really designed for young people to understand this part of history.
Thank you. And for those that your documentary has to do with your own history or family, what made you want to tell this story? Anyone can jump in.
Yeah, so Nok is one of my best friends. We met back in high school. And when we went off to college, we kind of went different ways. But there was one day where she came back into town and I was also nearby. So we had lunch and we just kind of started talking about, what we know about our family and how they came over following the war. And then we started noticing some similarities. And so that day we went home and we asked my mom, and she started actually saying that, no, there's actually a lot of relevance here. And so we found out that my mother and Knox, I believe grandfather, yeah, were both spies that did special intelligence during the Vietnam War along with American troops. And so that was just like really shocking to like learn. And so we wanted to dig further. And then we just also noticed, the difference in our family dynamics. I grew up with a lot of these stories being told to me at the dinner table, but Nok had a different experience. And so we really started just exploring what other families in our community were speaking, talking about, or maybe not. And so that was how the idea and the concept for the documentary came together. We have interviewed 9 different families, and just asking a lot of the same questions, but getting a lot of different answers and a lot of new learnings.
And how did the family members or even your family receive the film?
I think they all very it's a new experience for all of them for the people that we interviewed to be in front of camera, and some of them like they didn't even know certain things until they were on camera, until we gave the opportunity for the kids to ask the parents and the parents ask the kids. So there was very many like raw moments where they were discover stories in front of us. It was unfolding in front of us, and it was really beautiful. And I think some of them have shared with us that after that experience, they actually went home and talked. They were able to connect with their family more and had more questions. And then for the viewers, some of them use it as like a template for them to see, oh, these are the kind of questions I could ask my family. So it's been a rewarding experience to hear different feedbacks from people that were in the films and the people who watched the films. And yeah, our family is really proud of us. And we do want to expand it further. Yeah.
It sounds like some that can be expanded further.
Yes, yeah.
Emily?
Yeah, my family was actually incarcerated at the same camp that May Namba was at. And I met May through the Japanese American Citizens League after 9/11. We were doing a bunch of work trying to support Arab and Muslim Americans in Seattle to help them understand what their rights were, how to behave if the FBI comes to your door, things like that, which the Japanese Americans didn't have that kind of support during World War II. So I met May, and she's just such a phenomenal person. Obviously, she went on to be a leader in the community and do a lot of social justice work. She wouldn't call herself an organizer, I don't think, but that's exactly what she became later in life. And so for me, I got to learn about my family's experience through her, because my folks, much like Knox, did not want to talk about it. In fact, my grandmother, when I first started going to the various different 10 incarceration camps in the United States and documenting them, she didn't understand why I wanted to go there. And it was just such a painful place. So really this film was a labor of love. And I love May's family, and I'm grateful that she shared part of her life with me and many others so that we could learn about these experiences firsthand.
It's funny that you say that about her. When you watch the film, knowing what she experienced through that, and it was ordeal and heart-wrenching at times to watch, and learning about it. It's part of our history in the United States, but she had like a really positive attitude, fun person as well.
She's spicy, yeah.
And this question is for Catherine and Hazel. I'm really curious how you two found this story, and also why you wanted to do this documentary from your lens.
I first learned about Ruby Duncan's story. There was a book written back in 2005 called Storming Caesar's Palace, and I read it and I thought, wow, this should absolutely be, a documentary film. It was really sharing so much forgotten history that people are really not aware of. And for me, I'm adopted. I was born in Bogota, in Colombia, to a 16-year-old girl who felt that she could not keep me for one reason or another. And so I've always been drawn to sharing the stories of women of color, particularly mothers, who are struggling against systemic and intersectional racism and gender violence and, class issues, to be able to provide for their families and to create a better world. And so Ruby Duncan does that, 1,000 times over. So she, had been married, was in an abusive relationship, and picks up her kids and moves, and then ends up, she's working and falls in the kitchen at the Sahara Hotel in Las Vegas, and ends up needing welfare. And so for the first time, she's realizing and learning how inadequate all of the benefits are and how they, treat everyone so terribly. And so she, gets out there and fights. So she organizes the other moms in her community with her. And they, start out sort of saying, I didn't know that rights and welfare could be in the same sentence. And really, the film is incredibly empowering and inspirational, and just so exciting, because it really shows how one person can make a difference, even if you have, she did, a 9th grade education, and, had to fight all along the way. So it's really just a story of tenacity and courage. And I think it's so important for us to realize and recognize that, the economic justice work that she and all these other women in Las Vegas and around the country were doing is, a complete opposite to the myths and tropes that we have about women of color who are on welfare, and really that they are the visionary leaders of the past that we need to recognize, the shoulders that we all stand on today.
Mm. I also noticed I believe it was in the beginning of the documentary that you had a image of showing, or the history of how food stamps started. And I vividly remembered, like, the images, they were actually of white women, like, to support them, and, white families. But then all the negativity that later on arised from being on welfare or food stamp, it was mainly, and still today, it's about Black women or Black families.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are more white women on welfare then and now than there are Black women, and yet the sort of pervasive stereotype is that, it's Black women who are doing this or who are having to receive it. And so, yeah, it was really brave of all of these women to actually band together and to say, okay, we'll be the face of this movement if we have to, but really, we're not just helping us, we're helping families across the country. And yeah, Ruby Duncan and the other mothers of the welfare rights movement in Las Vegas brought food stamps to the state of Nevada. It was the last state to have it, sort of like today, there'll be programs that are federally funded, but then it's up to each state to actually release the funds to the people. And a lot of states don't want to do that. So today, even there's the coffers are full, but the state legislators and local governments don't want to share in the wealth. And we now have some of the highest economic inequality that this country has ever seen. So it's imperative that, folks get out there and, use this film as a tool, inspiration, and just education to see, like, what we can do, what works, what doesn't work, and yeah, get out there today.
Thank you. Catherine?
Sure. Yeah. So I've been working in documentary, and I was working as an editor in the early 90s on a film. And it was, there was an interview with Bobby Godsell, who at that point was part of the Chamber of Mines. And he was saying that between 800 and 900 people were dying underground in South African gold mines every year. And to me, that was the most astonishing, extraordinary statistic. I thought, how is this not spoken about every day in our lives? What is going on? How can you go to work and there are 3 people dying every day in the job that you're doing? Anyhow, so it took some time before. So I'd been wanting to make a film about gold mining and mining in general in South Africa for many years since then. And then in about 12 years ago, the class action was being developed against 32 gold mining companies in South Africa who have been found to be causing silicosis and spreading tuberculosis in the mines. So, and the reasons behind that are related to basically black exploitation, migrant labor exploitation, where people are housed, in the case of silicosis, in hostels, many people living in one room together, underground. It's very hot. Our mines are the deepest mines in the world. Just to get down there and just to keep it cool enough to work there and not die creates a petri dish of tuberculosis. And at the same time, our mines, the gold is found in silica rock. So when they drill into the silica rock, the dust, which is microscopic dust, they breathe it in and it causes silicosis, which is like a progressive lung disease, something like cancer. And that continues. And in some people, it progresses quite quickly. And in other people, it takes several years, 10 to 20 years before it depletes them to such an extent that they can hardly do anything. So their lung capacity gets reduced quite soon. And so even just walking from one part of their land to another is exhausting. Anyhow, so the class action was being built during that time. And by the time we started doing the research in 2015, they had already registered several people for the class action. And when we launched our film end of 2018 in Bizana in Eastern Cape, in an old church full of miners, ex-miners and their families, and it was a very powerful moment as well for that moment to happen, because part of the story is the myth making of the mines and the whole capitalist system of brutality, of exploiting people. So when the whole migrant labor system was built on an apartheid system of separating your families, of separating the men from the families, and putting them up in hostels on the mines and where they would work. And then they'd often do contracts of 2 years and not see their families for 2 years. And they'd go home, and often they would also take the diseases with them. Silicosis is not contagious, but obviously TB is. And this reinfection would just continue across the, back and forth. So they'd infect there, and then they would be cured, but then their family members would be infected and then probably reinfect them, and they'd bring it back into the mine again, and that kind of thing. So all of this was continuing over a century, 120 years of gold mining in South Africa. They've known these statistics, they've known about the silicosis, and silicosis also exasperates it, because the damage on your lungs means that you've literally got sores inside your lungs, and the TB just settles very well into that environment. So the chances of you having TB is huge as well because of that. So then sorry, I've sort of gone around about in circles, but it's a very complex and issue. The point that we were wanting to make also in the film is that it is a world story. It is the story of capitalism and the way that it works. And it's just been so much more efficient in South Africa, the way that they built those companies. And many of those companies went on to build their capital base on the South African gold, have gone on now to, whether it be Gencar or Anglo American or Gold Fields, or B&H Billiton, the Canadian mines. They all had some share in the South African gold industry, which allowed them to grow their business elsewhere in the world, whether it be South America or elsewhere in South Africa, in Africa, like West Africa and Australia and South America. So they've applied the same ideas of construction, of a business, of a capitalist mining extraction business, all else in the world, in India and all over. It's the way that mines work. So it was really meant to be a metaphor and an example of just what mining actually does. What does the extraction industry do, and how it brutalizes not only the people who are working underground, but also the people back home. Because what they've done is they've exported the burden of the disease ends up on the woman and the family in the rural areas of South Africa and Southern Africa, who are carrying their men on their backs to the toilet, who are having to feed and look after people who are, very, very ill. Silicosis basically eats up the inside of your lungs, so it creates sores. It's like little blades, microscopic blades that you're breathing in that lacerate the inside of your lungs to the point where you literally drown. I'm sorry, it's horrific, in your own, what's left of your lungs inside. And so it's devastating, it's brutal, and of course people, even if they did manage to make a little bit of money whilst working on the mines, they end up using that money to buy oxygen just so they could have some kind of life, to go from doctor to doctor in the hope that somebody would find a cure, not being even told that this disease is in fact incurable. And so the film itself, we wanted to bring the contemporary right up against the historic. So the stories are about people today, people who are struggling today with that. And in 2019, when we had our sort of world premieres, they announced the settlement, the out of court. So they settled out of court the class action and to pay 5 billion rand to miners for these diseases. And this is where we are now. And we are now started a campaign called the Justice for Miners campaign, where we're trying to support miners and their families to apply and assist them to get that compensation. But I have to tell you, today we are fighting so hard. It's just horrendous. The mining companies do not want to pay. They've made it a bureaucratic nightmare for these claimants to access that compensation. So it's every step of the way is like sludging through, walking through sludge, through mud, just to gain some kind of traction and get families some kind of relief, even if it's a small amount of money.
So basically, with the companies, there hasn't been much change, and also making it safer for these families and paying them more money for what they're doing.
Yeah, they've used the whole class action and the settlement as a kind of advertising campaign of how fabulous they are. They've even called the trust, is called the Tsimiso Trust, which means giving back, paying back in a South African language, and it's totally not that. It's they take these to their shareholders and make out that they're actually paying back the historical injustices, and it's not true. They have not changed. Today we have women working on mines. It's a new thing in South Africa that women are now able to work underground, and already they only started in around about 2006. Already they're finding silicosis in the women who are working underground. They haven't done nothing. The dust control levels they are self-regulatory, which means they regulate their own dust control, which is ridiculous. So and they have so much power, in our country. Our president Cyril Ramaphosa, his wife is the sister of one of the biggest mining companies, African Rainbow Minerals, is the sister of the CEO of Patrice Motsepe. and it's not only them, it's right across the government. There are linkages, there are shares held by government officials, there are all, it's the corruption is very deep. And it's not only in the recent government. This has been, we are a corporate state. We are a corporate country run by mining companies, because the mining companies keep this country ticking over. It industrialized South Africa. Mining industrialized South Africa. So everything about modernity is sunk into our every part of our economy, Yeah.
One last question on this. With the being that the community, when you first screened the film, do you feel like since they've watched your documentary, have they been a little bit more empowered to protest against this fight, what's going on?
Yes, I believe so. I mean, I think there are different levels. On the one side, we're interviewing especially the men, because they did not share. There's a kind of sort of barrier once you leave your home and you cross that barrier into the urban areas or to the mines. You don't share what happens on either side. Once you go there, you are in the. So they didn't really share their lives with their families back home. And we did very, very long interviews, and we did close on 30, 40 interviews across the region. And almost every miner would say to us, we want you to tell these stories to our families because we can't tell them. And there are many reasons why they say that, and I can talk to that, but it's a process of myth making, because they've been emasculated by the mines, and they come home meaning to be heroes, but they actually end up being dependent on their families, and the poverty has increased because of that. Their capacity to work the land is gone because they have no energy. They can't support their families anymore, even through any kind of employment. So there's that side. When we had the screening, it was also very interesting, because on both sides, the wives would be saying, oh, well, wow, we never knew what happened when you were away. Now we got to see what happens there, what kind of circumstances you were working under. And the men also got to see what the women were doing back home in all of these months that they were away. And they also expressed that as well. And once we started showing the film at one of the screenings, one of the sort of early screenings, premiere screenings, we brought some of them ex-miners and a widow from the Eastern Cape to Johannesburg. And she had the opportunity to ask the question directly of one of the mining executives, and said, why is it that my children can't go to school? Your children are going to the university. Your children can continue and build their careers. My children, I cannot afford school fees. I cannot send them to university. Why? And it was, it was heartbreaking, but it was really empowered her that she could face this person. People who've been working for 30 years, if you work in the company in any other industry, even in a capitalist system, if you work for 30 years in a company and you die, there's more than likely going to be a letter of condolence, or even somebody who comes from the company to the funeral, who speaks to the family. Nothing. There is nothing, no communication at all between the mining companies and the miners and the families. So there's been an absolute truncation of any humanity between these two people. It's extraordinary to me. I get every single day, I'm just completely bowled over how they've been able to literally cut off,
of course,
the human beings with no qualms whatsoever.
So my next question is for everyone. I noticed that in each film, the footage, the archival images were really used well to tell your stories. And if you could just share a little bit about that, how do you go about that? Or if someone assisted you with that, anyone can jump in.
Okay, yeah, archive for us was really, really important. And one of the big parts of our archive is the propaganda films. So the mining companies made propaganda films to entice people to come and work on the mines and to, in the beginning, especially when people were very happy to be on their land, self-sustaining, and part of their communities, and it was quite hard for them to get the labor, and they needed a lot of labor for the mines to make any kind of profit. They needed a lot of labor, so they used every tool they had in the book, and one of them was to make propaganda films. So we used those films. And part of our strategy was also, we were hoping, we used them without any copyrights or any royalty payments or anything. We found them, we telecined them, and we wrote to the Chamber of Mines and said, we're using these films for our film, and please let us know if you have any issues, whatever, but that's what we're doing. They never replied. And we were hoping they would take us to court for abuse of copyright, but they never did, because obviously then it would become public record and everyone would get to see the whole process of how they did that. So that was one of the areas. Another one is that my father is also a filmmaker, and he had friends who were making some of these films. So that became quite personal. One of my father's best friends made one of the propaganda films that we used in the film. And it was very interesting for me to speak to him as well about that, and how naive he was about what he was doing, and how he had made that film. And also being white in South Africa, the burden of privilege, well, it's not a burden for me, obviously. It's what it's done for, what it has done to inequality in our country is massive, and it remains so. The privilege that I have gained through being white has been fundamental. So a lot of the archive is also related to the metaphoric world of the upstairs and downstairs. The upstairs are the whites living in the towers, the ivory towers of Johannesburg, and downstairs are the mines. The miners living underground, building the country, bottom up, and all of those layers of privilege and poverty and and the whole system of, and it wasn't just apartheid, it all happened it started before that under the British. It was the British miners who actually came in, it was the British who set up the system, which when the Afrikaners under apartheid basically tweaked and perfected, but by and large, the influx control laws, the apartheid laws had already been kind of settled in by the British, and they didn't name them in the same way as apartheid. Well, that was coined by the Afrikaners, but that is my history. That's where I come from. That's my family, and so it was also very urgent for me to give an understanding of what my role is in all of this as well, to try and get to some kind of acknowledgement and take some responsibility for where I am as a white South African.
Thank you. And Hazel, you can go next.
Yes, thank you. Storming Caesar's Palace, as I said, is an archival documentary, and so there is a lot of archival, but it was really hard to find. When folks are looking for, if you call CBS or NBC or ABC and you say, I want to find footage of civil rights leaders like Dr. King, they quickly come up with a clip reel, and there's all sorts of footage, quotes from, famous speeches and all of that. But when I said, well, I'm looking for footage of Ruby Duncan, they were like, who? So it was really, really hard. I would go to the different archives and actually go through old film and just look and just hope that she was in the background somewhere. And that we, cataloged and organized and kept notes so that we would be able to try to license anything where she was in it. it was a really long process. When I first started, most of the material was not digitized. So we had to actually go to archives and encourage them to digitize their material, their photographs as well. And this sort of points to a larger problem in the United States, where we have basically 5 companies, media companies, owning all of our media, which therefore means all of our history. And we're seeing now with whitewashing of history and various governors and states trying to take away, sharing, cutting, like taking books out of libraries, all of this. It makes sharing these stories even more important so we understand our history. And the other problem is that it's incredibly expensive. So
I was
for,
going to ask you that.
yeah, licensing this material, it ranged, but I would say the average amount, it was $80 per second to license this material in, all media.
A lot of money.
And it's a ton of money. And I was lucky and I spent 15 years making this film. So this was a labor of love film for me as well. Where I was, working on the side and just trying to get it going. But I was able to fundraise and receive support from some wonderful foundations that ultimately allowed me to have enough funding to be able to license it. But I think, one of the things we sort of don't always think about is the fact that these huge, like, white male owned companies run all of, have our history. And so there's a way of reclaiming it. And I like hearing, Catherine, how you kind of tried to, get them to force their hand. We fair used some material as well. And I was waiting to see if anybody would notice. Luckily for me, they have. But I also would do a similar. I would do a similar thing. I think it would be a big campaign to be able to say how messed up it is, basically, that they, are hijacking our history. And the other point I'll just make really quickly is just that the reporters at the time were all white men. So the coverage of these events was always looking to male leaders to say, explain to us what's happening here today, as opposed to giving, the microphone to the, Black and brown leaders of the movement who actually knew what was happening, because they were the ones who were doing all of the work. So it's sort of a multi-layered problem when it comes to all of that. And so it was important for me, as someone who has a journalism background, to really make sure I was not being extractive in the work that I was doing in terms of going into the community in Las Vegas on the West Side. And so I spent a lot of time, with Ruby Duncan's family. She's like a second mom. I feel like I've been adopted by her in the community, and the other moms, because it was so important to have their legacy, really be told and shared, and wanted them all to be equally excited about it and feel as though, the film really represents everyone fairly and shares that history. So thank you again for having it here at the festival.
Oh, of course. And what was it like reaching out to her? Was it hard, or was it easy for her to, like, want to sit down with you and, tell her story?
Yeah, it's funny. She initially, Ruby was, she was willing to meet with me, but she's certainly very media savvy. Part of the film, we see that she learned, she knows how to activate media and journalism. So, in order to have their march down the strip in Las Vegas to sort of shut down gambling, given the violence and stuff that was a very possible reality. They could have been shot. They could have been all kinds of stuff. The cops were everywhere. The mob was running the city at the time. She and them, got celebrities, like white celebrities, women's, Jane Fonda, various people came, Ralph Abernathy, and marched down the strip. And so to get that media attention. So she was very media savvy and had been, sharing her story with the media. And generally people interview her once. She appears in some magazine or some newspaper or some, news coverage. And then that's it. They don't come back. They're not really interested in sharing, the aftermath of that story sort of with her. And so for me, when I approached her, she, again, was perfectly kind about giving me some time, but then was also like, okay, see ya. And I was like, wait, no, I'm coming back. Like, I have to keep coming back. And I think it, pleasantly surprised her. I mean, I think one of the good things about the film taking 15 years to make was that I had to prove that I was coming back time and time again. So definitely, almost every year was going back and doing filming with with her, a different person in the community, and other women who were leaders. And so I think that, sort of not just proved my passion, but my, real dedication to sharing and uplifting the stories, like in community, in a collective way. So that was important for all of us. And now she's a real champion of the film. Whenever we have screenings in person, she tries to come, and we try to bring her or Sandra. So I feel like that's also a testament to not just our relationship, but like her feeling proud of the film, which is great.
Thank you. And Tam and Nock?
So we asked the families to bring whatever pictures that they had of them when they were back in Vietnam. We try to ask them to find pictures from when they were children, younger, and bring everything that they could that was leading them up all the way to the United States. So there's also photos of what life was like once they arrived here. So and with that we did have some help with like scanning and kind of editing it in a really cool way where you can kind of see in our film like they're there and then it kind of disappears, but the background of the photo is still there. And that was a cool effect. But when it came to the B-roll part, we knew that it was very important because we needed to have a supportive visual to the story that was being told. And that honestly for me was really hard to do. Again, I grew up hearing these stories from my parents, but to now have to put the graphics, the videos, the imagery, showing what, a bomb going off looks like, showing what, being attacked by pirates look like, what cannibalism looked like, what living in refugee camps look like. So it wasn't just images that we were getting, we were also getting videography, and you can just see that. And I remember while I was, collecting all the B-roll that I can, and I remember just being upset with myself. I was like, these people are now at peace, and here I am asking them to go back and open a very old deep wound, and I just felt really terrible. But I think it just really made me further appreciate the sacrifices that our family did for us in order to have this life and this opportunity here. And it was still also important to make sure that the younger generation's voice, those that were, born here, to be able to share with the older generation what a lot of our own struggles have been like. We didn't survive a war, but we, inside our house is Vietnam, but outside our house is America, and that was really hard to navigate. And so, yeah, with a lot of with the graphics and everything, we were able to, tie everything together. And I think in the end, when we showed it back to all of the families, it's a very emotional kind of documentary, and there is a lot of very raw stuff in there. But we're proud of the work that we have.
Yeah, and I think that even I know that it was hard for your family, to see the film, but I think I don't want to say positive, but I think films like this, it's important for people that are not aware that this took place or they don't know much about it. I think that it's really important that it's out there for people to see and watch and learn from it as well.
Yeah, there's especially with the Vietnam War, it's interesting because we were able to find some, decent footage, and we realized that the Vietnam War was actually being telecasted in the United States. And so there was actually a whole movement against the Vietnam War that, now we're kind of learning from the American perspective. So yeah, all of it is just really interesting as we're able to like find and piece things together.
And Nock?
Yeah, I guess I just want to add on, like, it's really interesting how different people who are not Vietnamese would watch it and, come up to us and tell us about their perspective of the Vietnam War or how they are connected to it. Either they have family members that fought in the war, or they're married to one, or like, so it's, even though we focus a lot on our history, but it's interesting how our history is a history for a lot of different people who are not Vietnamese. So it's like connecting to so many different people. Yeah, just want to add on to that.
And Emily.
Yeah, I guess I have a couple things, and I'll try to be brief. I know we're running over time, but I really responded to what Hazel was talking about with the cost of finding this archival footage, because most of what I used was in the National Archive, which should be free, right? It should be. It was created by tax dollars and is housed, but it is not. Getty has a deal with them, and they, things need to be purchased, and it's so just that idea of the people owning the history here in the United States, and then really you can stream them online, but you can't get decent files, if you wanted to do something with it. So, having to go to that expense of licensing, even with things that are supposed to be ours. And so then that leads me to the next point that I wanted to talk about, was that history, the US history, which I am talking about primarily in my film, is kind of chopped up in the way that we learn about it, or the way that we think about it. So I grew up on the West Coast, so I definitely learned about the Japanese American incarceration. But now I live in Ohio. I teach here at an art school, and most people I talk to don't know that Japanese Americans were all rounded up and put into camps during World War II. So this idea that American history has these multiple layers, the intersectionality of what being an American is, using that historic footage was really important to me, but not just in showing the history of it, but also putting it side by side with the present. So there's many times in the film where there's a split screen, and I will have footage from the incarceration camp, and then I'll have footage of May and her family going back in a pilgrimage to the site together. And so the next generations are learning about this experience from May in the place. So having that side by side, I think, is really important. A lot of times, and I don't know if Catherine, your film is a very contemporary topic, but with Hazel, Tam, and Knox, people will say, "Oh, well, that's the past, right? How does that affect us today?" And it's so important that we know our history, and that we see how that has reflected in our lives. So that was a really important aspect for me, was to show the contemporary and the historical right next to each other, so that we knew that we could see the exact repercussions of that. And, unfortunately, race-based incarceration is not over in this country, and we still need to be learning those lessons today.
Okay, since we're running out of time, if you guys could just briefly tell us if you're working on any projects, and also where we can find you, your website, social media handles. Knock and Tam?
Sure. I am currently, I'm in LA. I'm an actress, but I also, produce and cast different projects as well. I'm currently working on a short film and also a feature film, and they are both relating to Vietnamese American journey. So yeah, it's really exciting. I also, one of the films I helped on, won Best Directing in Sundance this year. So it's been going around different festivals. So that's also really exciting. And for our film Rising from the Fall, you can find, we don't have a website or anything, but you can find it on Instagram. Just type in, let's see, I'm blanking out. Rising from the Fall .doc on Instagram. Yeah.
And Tam?
Well, I am a little bit of an activist. So I am part of a nonprofit called Dear Community, and it was started out of the Stop Asian Hate movement. And a lot of our mission is around supporting Asian-owned small businesses and Asian creatives. We know that without them, we wouldn't be able to celebrate our culture and honor our traditions. And so in my nonprofit, we host weekly community events where we just go and spend money at a restaurant to make sure they stay in business. And sometimes it leads to having bad karaoke at an Asian-owned bar down the street. So it's a lot of fun. If you're ever in San Francisco, look me up. You will find my contact information if you follow our Instagram. And yeah.
Thank you. Emily.
Yeah, you can find out information about Namba and different screenings at namba-movie.com. We're also on Instagram, also at Namba Movie, all one word. And then what I'm working on, so I am actually a visual artist. This is my first feature film, my first documentary. So thank you. I am actually working on some photographic pieces right now for a festival a photographic festival that opens next fall called Photo Focus. And my website for the artwork is ehmomohara.com, and the handle is ehmomohara.com on all of the platforms as well.
Hazel.
So you can find Storming Caesar's Palace on pbs.org. It is streaming. We broadcast during Women's History Month this year on Independent Lens, so you can stream it there for anyone who wants to share with their friends. We also we do have a website. It's www.stormingcaesarspalace.com, and there's ways there to bring the film into schools. So we have educational distribution as well, and so it can go into universities, colleges, kind of any professional, organizations. Like we would love, Social Workers of America or something like that to watch this too, because there is a lot of education for people who are working within the system, who are supposed to be serving and working for their clients who need public assistance. But of course, that isn't kind of the attitude that they tend to have. So it would be great for all sorts of folks to be able to have access to the film through the educational. We also have a full impact campaign where we've been sharing the film with community groups, nonprofits, BIPOC grassroots organizing groups across the country. So we've been screening. I think we've got now about 50 screenings in 36 states. And we're trying to keep it going. And we're working now on launching a new storytelling initiative, which is really trying to change the narrative. So it's showing, to Emily's point, the connections between the work that the women were doing in the 60s and 70s and saying, hey, we still have a housing affordability crisis. We still have an adequate income problem. Like, people have to work like 3 jobs in order to pay their rent, and all of these things. Childcare, understanding that domestic work is work and should be paid beyond adequately. So there are a lot of different organizations that we're working with that focus on different pieces of our film. And so yeah, all of our kind of social media handles are all Storming Caesar's Palace. And the project that I'm starting to develop now is going back to Colombia. I want to try to go home and trace my roots. As I said, I'm adopted and I haven't met my birth mother. I don't know anything about my family and my heritage, and it is time. I think I'm finally ready to go and discover all of that. And so for the moment, it's sort of starting to do that excavation, while at the same time really examining the history of American imperialism and intervention, and paying for the war on drugs and all these things, which had a horrible effect on people in Colombia and obviously in Latin America and everywhere, because that is what we like to do here. So, but
Thank
yeah,
you.
just to say, yeah.
Okay, Catherine. So we have like less than a minute. maybe 30
Oh, sorry. Okay,
seconds.
dyingforgold.com, and it's Justice for Minors campaign. So just www.justiceforminors.org. And we started an NGO, which I work as an activist, and where, as I said before, we're assisting claimants to try and get access to compensation, informing hopefully shareholders, people who own gold, how, problematic gold is and how bloody that mineral has become. And at the moment, I'm working on a new opera that is on a gay rights activist from the 1980s, Simon Cordy, a South African, and he started the first Pride marches in South Africa in 1990 and became a big activist around getting antiretrovirals to people with HIV and AIDS. And he was a very flamboyant, amazing character. So we're placing it in as a voguing night, his whole life, but as a voguing night, and it's opera, real opera. So I'm working as a projection designer on that, and then I'm also looking into making another documentary, more personal, about my father's work and mine. My father, it's really about us as consumers and rubbish, waste, and my personal responsibility for my waste, I should say. So my father made a film called Rubbish Olympics in the 60s around Black rubbish collectors in Pretoria at the time, apartheid South Africa, collecting white people's rubbish. And kind of, what does that mean today in our
Great, not to cut you off, we have 30 seconds left because we're going to get cut off.
Together. So you wrap up. Thank you so
Where can we
much.
find you? Do you have a website? Did you give that?
Yes, the Justice for Minors campaign, and then Justice for Minors and Dying for Gold are both websites. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.
And we're on Facebook as well.
The films will be on SparkFest until October 1st, and I hope you guys get a chance to watch each other films as well. Once again, thank you so much for your time.